All right, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to bring you our fall webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Fair or Fiction, Data Harmony in Biomedicine. And today's speaker is Ari Berman, CEO of BioTeam. He's an expert in scientific computing, specializing in high-performance computing, high-performance networks, data centers, storage, cloud, IT infrastructure, bioinformatics, and data analytics. So specializes in so many things. Ari has designed, built, and operated scientific computing environments for almost 30 years. His PhD in molecular biology with a focus on neuroscience helps him advocate for science and empower researchers to make discoveries from their complex data sets. His goal is to help create a dynamic abstraction of flexible infrastructure from research end users, enabling anyone to analyze and gauge knowledge from complex data sets. And today, Ari is going to discuss the drivers of data analytics in biomedicine, where we stand on the journey towards fair data, cultural considerations relevant to that journey, and the potential future of scientific discovery if we reach the goal of fair. Ari,
awesome. Great. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you all for joining. I will get the slides going here. And it's good to see some names on there I haven't seen in a while. So welcome. As Adam said, title today is Fair or Fiction, Data Harmony in Biomedicine. And this is continuing our fall webinar series. Because this is a BioTeam webinar series, I'm going to tell you a little bit about us in case you don't know already. BioTeam is a scientific IT consulting company. We sit right at the center of scientific research, data science, and advanced technology, pulling those things together to try to make science easier to do and thus making it go faster. As a company, we really focus on building data, scientific data ecosystems that are more usable, more broadly for science. Data that comes in from various locations, scientific instruments, individual data sets, community data sets. Ultimately, you want to use that in analytics and knowledge generation, and when you can for scientific discovery. And we live sort of in that central bit there, where we know all the infrastructure needed to make scientific ecosystems work, and then work in all the data parts of it at the top there as well. So we have a really amazing team of folks. We've grown a lot in the last couple of years. We're almost 50 people now. And we've got a very diverse, broad, and deep and collaborative group of research scientists, IT experts, and some outstanding support staff. So with that, let's get on to the topic here. Let's talk about the realities of FAIR in biomedicine. So I assume most people, at least the ones that I saw that joined the talk first, know what FAIR is, but just in case you don't, it's an acronym that stands for findable, interoperable, accessible, and reusable. And the four parts of those acronyms really describe the basic requirements for making scientific data available and usable across multiple research projects and centers. So this has been a thing that's been looked at and debated and trying to be implemented for well over a decade at this point. And one interesting thing is why fair? I think the obvious thing to everybody is data should be fair. Science and collaboration really require fundamental standards to be in place. The not obvious philosophy is that FAIR would align life sciences and biomedical communities' data to convert all data into knowledge and improve the understanding of the treatment of disease, basically making all data analysis ready, because all data is not analysis ready, especially if it's not your data. Accomplishing FAIR would essentially be the basis for creating a unified data ecosystem that can get more power out of the data that's out there. FAIR itself is bold, ambitious, and honorable, and extremely hard to do. So how are we doing with FAIR so far? By the image, I think you can guess that, not great, actually. There's some limited pockets of excellence, and there's places that are really trying to push this, but in general, as an industry, we got a long way to go. So is FAIR fiction? Kind of at the moment. So what's blocking FAIR from being a reality here? The short answer is actually people, not technology, as is often true. We do have, in my opinion, the technological advancements and the technology available to be able to make FAIR a reality, but we're limited by what people will accept and the culture of biomedicine can do. And so the long answer is that it's really complicated. FAIR itself is super, super hard to do. It's extremely complex, and there's a ton of historical data, like hundreds of years of historical data, but it could be done. It would take a lot of effort. There's a huge lack of unified data standards in the field, hence I thought the different power outlets throughout the world would be a good example of that on the right. And there's tons of distraction. There's a lack of computational sophistication, lack of tools and training, and essentially a lack of accessibility of solutions, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The interesting thing is that there's really no real incentive to make the effort to do FAIR. All incentives are sort of individual, like the way NIH grants are reviewed, the way papers are published. And for FAIR to really work, it needs to be a community effort. And so it's hard for people to justify putting time into this because it's just not really incentivized. It currently pays to do your own thing. Your funding gets diluted if you join with groups of collaborators, which anyone who's been on grants or center grants knows that. And there's not a lot of clear vision, leadership, or directives from funding organizations out there to get this done. There are pockets of this. There are groups that are trying to do it, but to really get out there will take a lot more. The last time I actually read through this slide, it took me like 10 minutes, so I'm just going to gloss over it. This was my attempt to put together the entire history of data and infrastructure over time. If you really think about it, the first real data transmission metric or system on the planet was DNA. And then it goes through cave writings and then cuneiform parts of language where you can write things down. Putting ideas into books, and then ultimately real data, modern data, started taking off with the invention of the Gutenberg press, where you could mass produce and mass distribute data. And then, of course, the entry of computer systems and networks started coming in the 70s and 80s. And then, of course, the thing that led us largely to where we are today, the inception of the internet and its distribution worldwide, and then the World Wide Web, and basically has become, now we've got clouds and services and data center, and really with our mobile technologies now, the entire world's knowledge is available in the palm of your hand, thanks to this connected group of data. And so this is an interesting problem, and this is a huge history trying to be reduced into a single slide. If you take all data in the world, which is quite a lot, the data generation is really at an all-time high, largely because of its accessibility and things that are collecting it. We've collected an estimated 98 zettabytes of total data to date. Now, if you don't know what a zettabyte is, most people know what a terabyte is, because your laptop or your computer usually has as a terabyte. So a zettabyte is 1,000 terabytes, 1,000 petabytes, 1,000 exabytes is a zettabyte. So it used to be that we didn't have enough raw materials on planet Earth to create enough hard drives to store a zettabyte, but that has changed with time, and we can now, obviously. And interestingly, just last year, so this is clearly accelerating, we generated 26 zettabytes on the planet last year, which is 10.5 gigabytes per person per day, if you just divide it out by our population. It's an enormous amount of data. So how does that apply to life sciences? It turns out that life sciences has become among the top data generators of all the sciences, which is fascinating, because there are others that just make incredible amounts of data, like high energy physics, for instance, the Large Hadron Collider. Every experiment generates 3 petabytes of data per second. But this is a sustained creation of data. And most of our laboratories have equipment that can generate many tens of terabytes of data per week. And there's hundreds of thousands of laboratories through the world. And modern data analytics really requires advanced computing because of the density of data, the type of data, the types of analytics that need to be done. You really can't always do it on your laptop or your office desktop anymore. So advanced computing, I say, are things like supercomputers and cloud environments and scalable infrastructures. Bioinformatics and data science have really taken over the biomedical data analytics space. And you really do need computational sophistication, or at least access to it to be able to compete today. So this has led to BioTeam's sort of standard issue is that there's a struggle to find enough storage for the data and enough compute power at a price that you can afford throughout the whole industry. And still, most lab scientists spend more than half their time just figuring out where to save their data. And without the right support, they make bad decisions, like these famous pictures on the right, in which the picture on the bottom are 20 years of data from a laboratory. It is literally sitting underneath a chemical shower in a laboratory. It's a bad decision. So most bioinformatics scientists spend about 80% of their time just cleaning up data to be analyzed, and that's a well-known fact. So we're only spending 20% of our time actually getting knowledge from data. Institutional high-performance computing and storage is usually an option for folks, but a lot of organizations, especially commercial organizations, have security levels that make it really hard to collaborate, and federal organizations have security issues that make it really hard to collaborate. The academic organizations tend to be a little more open, and where a lot of that happens. A lot of folks have gone to the cloud to make that easier. Large organizations really need to store hundreds of petabytes of data, and then they need to figure out how to analyze it. And the intersection of big data and artificial intelligence, machine learning, has forced starvation for storage and compute. Now, I just said a whole lot of buzzwords, so I'm going to go through buzzword slides here. Take us back to big data. I always had this big data slide because no talk used to be complete without a big data slide. What was big data? What is big data? It's essentially the ability to store and access large amounts of data. Really led to what we called the information age. And there's just a ton of data being generated. In life sciences, everyone was and is generating a lot of data. They had nowhere to put it and had less clue how to analyze it. This led to a data science revolution in life sciences and advancements in AI. And now I have an AI slide because no talk is complete without an AI slide. So let's be honest, really honest. This remarkable field is super overhyped. It's reminiscent of big data as being overhyped. It's pushed by marketing organizations in ways that are somewhat unhelpful because people who don't really understand what it is think it's going to solve all the problems, and it won't. And usually I go through a lot more of this, but this is where I'm going to stop. Most people just really don't understand what it is. Most people think it means this, that there's going to be some sentient computer system that ends up, destroying us all. We're a long way from that. And the type of AI that we all talk about is actually a particular type of machine learning called deep learning or neural networks. And that is nowhere near the complexity or even the ability to become sentient. So most organizations are essentially telling us that BioTeam that they need to be AI ready. And that has created a lot of good things, actually. And a lot of really positive things have come out of the immense hype around AI. So I'm not totally knocking it. I'm just saying, let's be real about it. So what essentially happened here is that we transitioned from the information to an analytics age. We now have to figure out how to gain value from our collected data, and we're getting better at it. The last 5 years or so, we've really seen a lot of advances in really trying to consume large amounts of data and making use of it. The whole AI thing put a lot of pressure on the field to harmonize data, which has led to, here's another buzzword, digital transformation. And we hear this in almost every organization we go to. So what is digital transformation? The way we define it is it's the unification of digital and transformation. Digital, which is data policy, standards, metadata curation, and data models, and transformation, which is really people-driven, which is cultural alignment, funding, and commitment to doing this type of work that allows better use of data assets in the ways that we're talking about. Essentially, if digital transformation goes well, you sort of realize FAIR. FAIR becomes a reality. There's a lot of digital drivers for this type of transformation. Real paradigm shifting technologies that started with big data. The cloud sort of was adopted as a way to really handle a lot of that. And then Internet of Things, which is the reason we're generating so much data right now. And now the push through AI is really driving organizations to need to sort of fairize their data ecosystems. There's a lot of cultural drivers that are still blocking it, but need to change, which is incentives, which I mentioned already. There's a strategic alignment between leadership, areas of the organization that are actually implementing it, and the scientists actually doing the work. That is often completely misaligned. Organizational priorities, and ultimately training. People's knowledge and ability to do these things, and understanding the reasons to go through the effort to do it is a big part of digital transformation, working or not. So data is a growing problem. It's not getting better. We are generating more and more data, and we're generating too much and not analyzing enough of it. Data management, it's sort of a fleeting goal, and people in general are having a hard time with it. Folks in life sciences still are just like, let's buy more storage, or let's put more in the cloud, or just keep spending money on it. And we're not completely managing our data. Again, there are pockets of excellence here. And then there's a lot of disparate and competing data standards in our industry that make common analysis super challenging, and harmonizing data is really, really hard. So as I said already a couple of times, AI/ML is a major motivation behind the digital transformation efforts. And there's been a huge push towards the cloud and away from local infrastructure, really due to a mixture of need and really effective marketing that is creating its own problems. And that's a talk that I gave a few months ago on cloud versus on-premises architecture for life sciences. Go to our website and check that out if you want to see that. That's a whole topic on its own. But that's been an interesting thing that's affecting the state of digital transformation. There's a ton of data platforms around, and they don't really interoperate either. And there's really highly disconnected efforts globally. COVID was a partial exception, but it also highlighted a lot of these problems, in that the world suddenly decided to collaborate and drop all the all the pretenses and then share all the data, except that the data was in a multitude of different formats, and data harmonization is still ongoing with that to try to make sense of it. So, and as I've said a few times, there's examples of success in this in silos, but they're limited, and usually new organizations are the ones that are leading that effort. Okay, so this is a pretty dense slide that I'll go over briefly, but this essentially is me trying to condense the entire industry into a single slide, the state of the industry's data capabilities. And this leads us to the deeper exploration of whether FAIR is happening or not. And so if you look across this, I just have three major divisions, and it's mostly from our viewpoint, from pharma, which really is the commercial private industry, the US federal government, and academia. And if you look on the right, the colors represented, blue is innovating. That's like we're really pushing the limits and really changing. Dark green is advancing. Green is sustaining, meaning it's productive but not really changing a lot. And the reds are lagging or just actually behind for dark red. So one thing that we are doing really well across the board is data generation, but that's not innovating because we haven't changed how we're generating data or what we're doing with it necessarily. It's just we're still generating a lot of data. The internal data storage capacity of the organizations is kind of all over the map. There's federal government's a little bit behind. This swings back and forth. Pharma tends to be in a sustaining pattern, and academia right now seems to be a bit ahead on being able to store stuff. Internal computational capacity, that's also generally an issue with pharma and the US government. Both are trending towards the cloud to try to solve those problems. Academia tends to always lead this, at least in the US. It's a big leader in computational capacity and supercomputing. Cloud capabilities are things that have really started to advance. Pharma really moved way forward in this in the last few years. Again, for the second time. Again, see the other talk for that. The federal government has started moving towards this much better, and academia has started to make use of this. So it's sort of sustaining. Data transfer capabilities. In general, pharma has a hard time with this, and the federal government could also be lagging in some cases, but in other cases, they lead the effort on this. It just depends on the part you're talking about. But really, the thing blocking that in pharma and the government is security and the networking folks' understanding of what needs to happen. Academia leads in this almost always. Data management is just sort of bad across the board. And I'll leave it at that. And data standards are also bad behind across the board. Now, it's not behind, it's just lagging because there are data standards and people are working on these data standards and they are starting to gain some popularity, but it's still behind the curve of where we need to be today. Data analytics, there's some real innovations happening in parts of the industry, like certain parts of pharma are trying some things that are pretty cool to move things forward. The government and academia are not actually far behind on that. AI/ML, it's a mixed bag. I'm trying to average this across a lot of organizations. Some individual organizations are really leading the effort on this, and they could be in pharma or the government, and some are not. And data sharing, pharma by nature has a hard time data sharing. They are working on that. Everyone else is basically doing the same thing. And so overall, we've got a lot to do here, a lot to do to really get to FAIR. All of these parts of the data journey need to work well for that, for FAIR to become a reality. So what does this say? This essentially says that there's a large fracturing of the life sciences data ecosystem. So why? Why is there fracturing? And this is a pretty simple answer, but a very complex and detailed discussion, which is that biomedicine life sciences really lack unified data standards. It's really hard to combine data from across multiple organizations and from multiple projects. And, I just grabbed as many as I could find right off. I could fill the page with data standards organizations that are really starting to drive this forward in good ways. And so there's just some examples down here on the bottom right. But it's created an ecosystem that is really hard to work well in. I would say that genomics is a bit ahead of all the rest, but there's a lot of other data types out there that need to be involved. Clinical information is really hard right now, and is data standards in that are starting to move forward through like HL7 FHIR and OMOP from OHDSI there. But most data is locked into electronic health record systems that aren't designed for analytics; they're designed for compliance. They're very different systems. Or actually, the way most organizations handle this is they have completely separate systems to store and make data available, and it has to be done differently. It's really far from FAIR. It's very isolated to be compliant with the laws and rules. And de-identifying data is really difficult and can lose key information that can help discovery. So that's a big problem. And then ultimately, throughout the hundreds and hundreds of years of history of life sciences research, historical data is really locked up in publications, and it's really hard to get out of it. There are lots of efforts to automate pulling information out of those, and there are some great efforts there, but there's a lot to do. And each domain and each project really has its own format and standards, because again, there aren't incentives to do otherwise. And if you differentiate yourself, you're more likely to get grants and money and funding. And so there's not a lot of incentive to fix this problem. So I said this earlier, but data platforms, they're kind of everywhere. That's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. This is a huge buzz term loaded space. There's data lakes, data oceans, data fogs, swamps, islands. There's the data universe, data warehouses, data commons, data ecosystems, data mesh, data fabric. It's just loaded with, all sorts of things, data islands. Or digital islands. There's a whole bunch of interesting things here, and just about everyone has experienced part of this, right? And then there's the data commons platforms, just a few that I've listed below that we've interacted with, and the large project from NIH a number of years ago that kind of started some cultural change in this space, the Data Commons Pilot Phase Consortium. But the truth is that right now, while these systems individually are actually pretty great and help individual organizations, they really just build more silos of excellence. It's not accessible to the long tail of scientists either, because most bioinformaticians, data scientists, people who do this write the tools for themselves, not for laboratory scientists or the long tail scientists who don't have really the sophistication to know how to use APIs or Jupyter notebooks or any of those things. And so what we really need is a diversity of tools and approaches that are more accessible to a broader scope of folks. They need to be more cross-compatible than they are. There's the lack of data standards and interoperability. You essentially lose the power of data in collaboration. And NIH's new data sharing policy is creating a whole lot of heartburn in the world. It's a great start, and I'm glad they did it. But this is why there's heartburn, because there's no real direction or guidance on how to get there. So one thing that we don't talk a lot about, we talk a lot about at Bioteam, but we don't talk a lot about in the industry, is what is the value of data, right? And this is key for digital transformation. In general, in our field, there's no understanding of data value. And there are two ways to look at this. There's the monetary value, the investment, how much is data worth? What did it cost to generate? And in the public space, can you sell it? And it's a big industry, actually, and is important to consider. But ultimately, what we're talking about is what's the scientific value of data. And we've had this discussion ever since genomics became a thing, and maybe even before that, which was, will this data ever be reused? How long do we have to keep it? What's the impact of each unit of data? When you sequence a new genome or something like that, and you have abundant samples, it's been long determined that it's far easier to just resequence the data than keep the original data around, because it's big and takes up a lot of space. And so we really don't understand and haven't done a lot of work on understanding the value of data. And so that's why we just keep adding storage and paying more money to keep more stuff, because we think it's all valuable, which is actually reminiscent of hoarding. So scientists are great hoarders of data. Without this understanding, everything's just high value, as I just said. So we just end up keeping everything and expand storage. So, we can't prioritize investments in data that are aligned with strategy, because everything's important. And all the scientists and the organizations, even more so, think that data is all important. We spent money on it, we need to keep it. Or, we spent resources and energy on it, we need to keep it. It could be valuable someday. So let's look at a use case here. And this is a great use case, which is search. And this came out of an NIH effort, which I'll go through in a minute, earlier this year. So what's needed to do search? And I took these from the slides of that particular workshop. If you think about what's the user experience, what does a user need to search? There's a user and there's a need, there's information they need. And then the search process goes through data and repository. You have the data in a repository that is searched, those results are visualized, and then you analyze those things. If you take these things and stick them together, what's the search journey? The user has a need, and the search algorithm goes through the data in the repository, and then the information, the results are visualized and analyzed. It turns out that this is one of the hardest things to do. We take it for granted because things like Google have figured this out on a very, very large scale for a very, very broad index of data. But findable, search really is findable, accessible, and interoperable, all wrapped into one. And it could also be reproducible if it worked better, right? Because then you could have access to all the data. This is real difficult to do for non-protected data, and some of the greatest need is actually with personal health information, which is harder because of the compliance that needs to go around it. So this directly impacts human health, whether search is done right or not. So as I said earlier, this came from the NIH Office of Data Science Strategy Search workshop, which was in January of this year. And the workshop really identified three primary use cases for search in our space. Data set discovery, which is obvious, focuses on trying to find data sets, typically one or more files on a particular topic. Cohort building, so finding and pulling together sets of human subjects can be used for some type of comparative analysis, or animal subjects, or whatever it is across life sciences. And ultimately, knowledge retrieval, and this is the hardest part, identifying facts and pieces of connected knowledge on a specific topic in a quick and low effort manner that doesn't require additional data manipulation and analysis. This is real hard to do, and this is where sort of the semantics and ontologies and controlled vocabularies community comes in, the semantic web community as it is, trying to actually contextualize data in a manner that allows you to ask intelligent questions of it. This is where we are the most disconnected in our field, and one of the things that makes FAIR the hardest to do. So if you just look across the components, what's involved in search, the search journey as we had on the other slide, the data, the repository, search, visualize, and analysis. Data governance goes across all of this. That's really important. Having a data sharing culture is important to just put data in repositories. The user interface is really key across all of these areas, again, for accessibility. The data quality and data management is it's probably also important for visualization, but pretty much all of these areas. Accessing data comes under the search and the repository part of it. Discoverability goes across it, which of course is findable, accessible. Metadata alignment across various repositories that can be searched is important. And data reuse basically comes from the data, and if the data is in a common or at least unifiable context, it makes it a lot easier to make the data useful. And interoperability really needs to happen across repository search and visualizations. So there's a really interesting use case, and most people don't think about it, sort of like most people don't think about how hard email and printing is, but it's shockingly hard if you've ever run an IT group. So how can we get to FAIR? I'm going to show you this real quick. I'm sure everyone knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have basic physiological needs at the bottom and self-actualization at the top. We have taken this and recast it for research computing. So this is sort of the hierarchy of research computing needs, in which at the bottom you have the network, so you can move data and access data, storage and compute, where you analyze and store it, obviously. Data management sits on top of that in an ideal world, so that you can manage all that stuff below. On top of that, tools and workflows and analytics go on top of it, and then discovery is sort of the self-actualization. That's where we're all trying to get. And there's really important spectrum of people along this whole thing to support it, adopt it, use it, and perpetuate the spectrum of information, or the spectrum of services that are needed to do this. Today, most researchers really have to focus on this. No matter how much sophistication they have, they focus on everything from storage and compute up to discovery. Most researchers avoid the network because it's scary, and they stay away from it, but they do complain about it. What it really should be is limited to here: tools and workflow and discovery, which means that in order to really accomplish this, the data management layer has to be really, really key. And that's where FAIR really starts to happen. And if this is done right, researchers really shouldn't care, or clinicians shouldn't care where their data are or what it's going to be analyzed on. It should be abstracted away so that they can focus on the science, and then research computing and IT can manage the underlying architectures to be able to help them do their work. So really, to do modern biomedical research, or modern biomedical research, is this integrated spectrum of infrastructure, software, services, and support that are focused on making science more accessible and just plain easier to do. This is one of our focuses these days. If you reinterpret this sort of into a traditional software stack diagram, there's a bunch of components of this, right? If we talk about the infrastructure, which were the bottom two levels of the prior pyramid, which by the way includes cloud as part of it, you really need next generation architecture to support science. You really have to pay attention to this, because if this layer is not right, none of it works. And then ultimately you have scientific data. This is where data standards, FAIR, data value, data lifecycle management, which includes the value of data, and data citizenship. People need to understand, they have to be good data citizens to be able to scale this and move it forward. And then ultimately, right now, the hardest thing to do is data harmonization, data hygiene, and data governance for the reasons that we've talked about this whole time. And so that's the next layer on top. Once you have all those, then you can have integrated data sets. Then you can really share data. Data commons can interoperate. You can have collaboration with multiple types of data from multiple data projects. And then the place where everyone wants to be is analytics and visualization tools. This is where we turn those data and those pieces of information into knowledge. And can use it to really start accelerating science. And there's a bunch of stuff that's a component of this that's really important. Security on the right there, APIs. You really want to be able to automate a lot of this, and then have things like reference data services, so you don't have to copy the cancer genome atlas 20,000 times across lots of things. I know the storage companies love when you do that, but it's not great. Let's find a better way to do it. So what needs to happen for FAIR not to be fiction? First, you need data unification across the industry. And this is one of our sort of large, audacious goals. It's actually the vision of our company, which is data scientists and bioinformaticians spend most of their time, as we talked about earlier, getting data into formats and contexts that allow them to be analyzed together in the first place. So data harmonization. We need to solve that problem universally and in a way that doesn't make things harder for the scientists, for the data scientists, for folks actually using the data. And then, as I just said, we need to abstract IT infrastructure away in a way that makes it more accessible for science, and so that they can really focus on the science, not on the technology. And just reiterating what I already said, that way they don't have to spend as much time just figuring out where to save stuff. They should not care where it is. And ultimately, and this is the most important one, I think, out of all of this, we need to create a technology-forward science culture. Most life sciences researchers and clinicians really lack computational sophistication. This is the long tail I'm talking about. I joke, this is less true anymore, but they can barely print and use email. But they need systems to be designed to be accessible by that population, by the people who are in the laboratory generating data, by the people who are in the clinic collecting data, by people running clinical trials who need to compare data against other things to make treatments for disease more likely. Most infrastructure and analytics platforms target people who have a lot of expertise. Sort of said this already. You have to know APIs, know how to code, understand how to use high performance computing systems. And it creates a barrier for the long tail of science and a bottleneck for efficient discovery. And then ultimately, funding organizations really need to incentivize and require data standards. And so, I guess I could have put another slide for this, but is FAIR fiction? No, but are we there? Absolutely not. There's a long way to go. I think we can do this. I think that the culture is starting to align on the need to do this. There's the start of some incentives coming out about this, but I think we have a long way to go, and it's an important thing to do. So with that, thank you for listening. It was a bit of a fire hose. It's one of my favorite fire hose pictures. And just let you know that Bioteam is celebrating its 20th year this year, which is pretty exciting. And we're having a celebratory webinar on December 7th at 1 p.m. And it's 20 years of Bioteam, and it'll be myself and the three founders that are still working for the company, just sort of giving some brief insights into the world. So go to bioteam.net/events if you would like to check that out. And that's all I've got for you today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ari. And related to your last slide there, I think we got a great question from Warren Kibbe that I wanted to bring up. So he says, the parts that weren't included in FAIR and maybe should have been is one, providing credit or recognition to people who contribute to a FAIR ecosystem.
Yeah. Yep.
Interpretability. So how easy is it to understand the data? And also usability related to that interpretability, but also covers things like how well annotated, how easy it is to learn to use a data set or a data ecosystem. And we'd just love to hear your thoughts on the lack of attention to these components and how it may have hurt adoption to FAIR.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And Warren, hi, thank you for coming. We should catch up some point. But yeah, so attribution, I think, is really what you're talking about. How do you make attribution indelible? And we've had these discussions before. This is one of the few uses of blockchain that might be interesting in life sciences. But how do you make it so that attribution goes beyond the last paper that had the information in it, and gives credit all the way back, because that's also an incentive for sharing. So I agree. That's a great point, and I'll add it in the future. Any other questions? Anyone want to throw questions into the chat? Excellent.
Yep, and just so everyone knows, we will make the recording available after some time. So if you want to share this or get a copy, we'll be sending that out to anyone who registered.
Wait another minute or so, see if anyone has any questions you'd like to throw in. If not, we'll give you all back a few minutes of your day.
Oh, and you're getting a happy birthday. Yes, it's Ari's birthday today. So everyone wish Ari a happy birthday.
Thanks, Andre. Appreciate it. I would not recommend giving a webinar on your birthday. Yes, Philippe. Yeah, people, processes, and data and technology in that order. I agree. Awesome. Okay, so Ezekiel, is FAIR truly something that can be attained? Yes, I do actually think we can do it. Is it measurable? There's been some really good progress made on figuring out how to measure FAIR, like actually quantify it. There were some rubrics formed, so I think there's a system called FAIR Shake, which is kind of interesting. Go look that up. And basically, you can produce these these rubrics that define in certain localities or in certain situations how do you attain FAIR, and so you can actually analyze how fair something is. And so that's a really interesting thing. I think we need to define it a lot more. I think we need to have interoperability metrics and things like what are common data elements and how well does your system align to that to happen before we can really do that. But I do think it's possible. And Bioteam has some wacko ideas of how maybe to get there a little bit quicker, that if someone wants to talk about it offline, happy to. See here. Are you seeing a rise in metadata curation given the success of new age BLEP?
NLP was it was just a typo.
NLP. Okay. Thank you. Boy. In pockets, I guess I'd say. I don't know, Adam. What do you think? You know this space too.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely you're seeing NLP and just a lot of these transformer architectures being really successful. I just think it's a huge opportunity, I think, for AI ML to fill in the gaps where it's sort of augmenting what humans are good at. So it's going to take a lot of humans, I think, doing annotation to get there. But yeah, I would say we should be seeing better metadata curation due to the AI based approaches for sure.
And I think there's a difference between automated metadata curation that is good and relevant versus manual curation. And I'd say, there are entire, job descriptions now that are solely about metadata curation. There's the data wranglers, those sorts of people that really work on just that. And I think that's an interesting distinction. I would say automated. There's a lot of systems, as Adam said, that are starting to be useful there, but it's possibly a while off. Great. Any others you see there, Adam?
Let's see. Where are the training sets for tool developers? Not very specific,
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly how to approach that question, because the question is, there's a few. Are they publicly available? Not always. Are they relevant to what you're trying to do? Also, not always. It depends on how they were assembled. It depends on the context of the data you're trying to look at. So if you're looking at training neural networks, you really need a really well curated body of data and a well-defined question that you want to answer with those data, because it's just a math model that's being assembled somewhat automatically out of patterns of data. So if you give it a whole bunch of stuff that you think makes sense and you run your data through inference, it's not going to work necessarily unless it's really well done. So I think that part of FAIR is developing a lot of public training sets for use, which involves standards. So if there's standards in industries, if there's a gold standard for creating inference sets for something, use these data to start developing your own stuff, add your own data to it, those types of things. I think it's a great thing that could happen. So
yeah, great. Yeah, and these are all great questions. And I would say, like, let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to reach out to us with any, questions, feedback, ideas for future webinar topics you might like to see. We're always open to hearing more from our attendees. So we're getting a couple more questions. Should we be using the ideas established by libraries to help with this issue? It is digital data that has value. The question is, who will support the resources for this?
Yeah, that is a really great point. I think, I tell folks all the time, we can learn a lot by looking at other industries and other organizations. And, libraries' job is to organize and present information on a broad scale. And there's a lot of really cool ways to do that. And, I think in life sciences, we love reinventing things. But I think that's a really, really good point. The National Library of Medicine, actually, I think, they have some real interesting viewpoints on this particular thing as a library, like they're thinking as a library. I think the National Center for NCBI is starting to more align with its parent organization of NLM and starting to treat it more like a library. And so, coming up with the data value, as I said earlier, and as you reiterated here, anonymous attendee, I think that's it's real key, because once you understand the value, you know what to index, essentially, right? Which is what libraries do. They index based on the most relevant information and context, and that's one of the things that's missing in our space.
So this is one more kind of to your scientific data value question. What are the trends in data as a commodity market? From the BioTeam point of view, could the market become the engine for FAIR?
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah. So the way the culture is currently, I think it has to be that way, right? They, sort of like, taking really bad life sciences analytics algorithms that are written by people who never studied algorithms, making those more effective and applying real computer science know-how to those things was an industry job. It was not going to be funded. There was no incentive to really do it. And so industry had to sort of commoditize it, as you said, and come up with a way to market it and sell it in order for that to start happening. And it did start to happen. And it's happened pretty broadly in the AI space, a whole lot by NVIDIA. They've created a whole ecosystem of systems and tools and information just in our space alone, because they can sell it, and that's a nice thing. So I do think that for data to become commoditized, it has to be more valuable to buy the thing than it is to do it yourself or not do it at all, and make it easier. And thus, I think incentives have to be there for that. But I think the market absolutely could become an engine for FAIR, and probably, at least in the US, given our the way we operate in a capitalism society, is I think it has to be that way to start, because I don't think there's a way to do it sort of from a grassroots place. But it's a great point.
Awesome. Yeah. So in closing, again, check out our upcoming webinars. The next one will be on December 7th. And also, we will be at Supercomputing. For anyone who will be at Supercomputing next week, Ari will be there in person. You can buy him a birthday beer or just come say hi to us. We'll have a full booth and plenty of other BioTeam folks that you can talk to and interact with. So we'd love to see you there.
Yep. Booth 3907, if you'd like to come by. So Awesome. Listen,
Excellent.
thank you all for your time. Thanks for being here, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.